Welcome back. Let's look at the user interface of the main form because I removed one button, the stop button, and made it a start-stop button here. I renamed it to button start stop, and I also added an action list. And the action list has 3 actions, one to start the server, one to stop the server, and one to show Swagger UI. Important, Swagger UI has the onUpdate method implemented because onUpdate does enable or disable the button depending on what you're implementing on update. Let's look at that. So I say the action Swagger is enabled when the server is active. Great, huh? And you might wonder, server? Where does server come from? That doesn't make any sense because like server, we don't have server in the main form. When I create the main form using the XData template, there is no server. Well, this is where I differ from the implementation, and that's coming up real soon. Let me just get into the actions first. With regards to start the server, stop the server, we don't have it on update, we just have like an action. And for start server, we toggle the server to true, and for stopping the server, we toggle its state to false. So that way, start stop calls the same thing, toggle server. And toggle server, if we look into that method, sets the server active property to the Boolean parameter, and the server active property sets it to the Boolean parameter aActive, and update interface updates the user interface. And you wonder, why do you need to update the user interface? Because you have these nice things here with onUpdate on the actions, right? Well, that doesn't help me if it's just one button, right? So the event of the button actually needs to be switched, and that's what I do. So if I say if the server is active, then the button action of button start stop is action stop server, and if the server is not active, the button is associated with the action to start the server. That's how I flip it around. Obviously, and this is where it comes to implementation details. Of course, I could have used the same action, right? And then inside of the action, I could have said like, if the server is active, do this, otherwise do that. But what this solution gives me is that the button caption is automatically updated, associated with the action that I use, because the action could also get an image. And if you have an image associated plus a caption, you already have 2 things that you have to change when the status changes. So instead of doing that, I opted to create a button that has either this action or that, depending on what the state of the server is. In my opinion, the better approach, we might disagree, but this is what programming is all about. We have our own preferences. The implementation of Swagger UI is, of course, the same action all the time, and the act Swagger UI is doing nothing else but doing a shell execute of the URL of the Swagger UI endpoint. And that is something I can't go into detail in because I can't completely explain XData how it works in this tutorial. As said in the introduction, here I'm focusing completely on the example, showing you how to implement a certain use case, to answer a certain question, to find a solution to a problem. But you have to do research of the fundamentals either in the product documentation or using the learning materials that are presented in the introduction as a starting point. Let's solve the mystery where the server comes from. Is server this, and is server active? Server active. Where is that coming from? Obviously, it's a property that refers to the server container that is being created by XData automatically. That's our home of the container that houses our server component, our dispatcher, and I added a property for that. Normally, if you go to the server container, you would find something like a var here. I removed that because I don't want any of it. The only thing that gets created automatically, if I look at my project options, That's just good practice. The only thing automatically created is the main form. And the main form then initializes the server. So here we have the server container, which is being created. If we go to form create, this is form destroy, form create. Here, that creates the server container, updates the interface accordingly, and then when the form is destroyed, the server container is freed. Could I have done create self and not use the form destructor? Correct. I could have done that too. Let's make the code more simple. There we go. That's a different option. Obviously, you have to consider how long you keep your form around. In this case, the application will stop if the form closes, so it makes sense to also take down the server container and everything. So it makes sense to tie it to the destruction of the form, which is fine. But this, just be careful here, especially if you had a look at my XData course. These things have to, the architecture has to be completely different if you also want to use XData as a Windows service, for example. Then you need a little bit more sophistication, but this is already very, very detailed to explain and present for how it works with Holger tutorial video. So this is where we get the reference from, but of course we also need to pimp it up a little bit. So we're looking at the server container. We have a procedure start, stop, we have a base URL, we have a Swagger UI URL, and we have an active property. So the active property, literally get active, reads the dispatcher property, because the dispatcher, believe it or not, determines if the XData server is running or not. And the same for the base URL. We use the server.base URL, replace the plus with a localhost, because if we look at the server, here, the base URL is being set like this. We're not using a configuration file and all those things. Again, if you want a whole detailed explanation how you can set up a wonderful, comfortable XData server with everything like Windows services, that it compiles to Linux and all these things, and also has logging enabled, please have a look at my XData course and also at the TMS Web Core book. There is also great explanations to get you started with XData. Because of the fact that we put all this into the public declaration, we can then access this from the main form referencing the server. So server.active equals aactive and so on. You might wonder, you can set active as well. Yes, I implemented also the set active, which then sets the set active. Yeah, wonderful here. Control Shift down should get me to set active Delphi, not get active. Okay, so let's try control click. There we go, that works. Set active, dispatcher active equals the value. So this is not only a read-only property, it works in both ways. Start and stop kind of become redundant, I agree. But I added them before and I didn't want to remove them because I'm not using them. I'm not calling start or stop inside of this project. So that really is the main form with the added creation and destruction of the server container. Also, what I changed on the server container, very, very important, the dispatcher, the active property is false. So if we start all this, which we can't because it's already running, if we start all this again, it's not active. So I have to click start first. The default is that it's already started. One point of caution here, because I removed it, if you specify a server URL in here that is not reserved, for example, if I made it here 2009 and I start this, my application doesn't crash, right? But it throws an error as soon as I don't have access to this resource. I have to reserve the resource first. And using the TMS, using the TMS utility, the HTTP config utility, I have to reserve the endpoint first. And if you don't do that and you have basically your application starting, it crashes right away. And this way, I would be able to catch the error, which I didn't do, and then handle accordingly. So let's change this back to 2001. Poof, right there. And that is something I just wanted to mention, because this is like that the fact that this is active is true by default has been quite a few questions from developers. What is wrong with their XData server because it's throwing an error right away? Especially if you want to load a settings file from somewhere, it's impossible, because the moment your application becomes, the form becomes active, your dispatcher becomes active, and then loading the settings doesn't make any sense because it's already trying to go to the URL that's defined at design time. So this way, you're safe to go, set active to false. So the final step is to implement the directions service. And I'm just going to do the declaration and the implementation of the services. And in the next video, I'm going to dedicate all to how the directions are being retrieved and returned, because that is, I would say, the most complex piece of code I've written in quite a while, because it includes asynchronous stuff with callbacks and waiting for a thread to complete. That is something I want to dedicate its own video to that. I don't want to put that in with anything else, because you need a little bit of time to digest the content of that video. So let's, for this part of the video, just the service. So the service number one and only one with the only message in the interface declaration is function driving directions with the parameters origin and destination. I have switched from using a origin and a destination in this case because this is being shown to the outside world. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I go here and look at this service, this is shown, and it is very, very odd for people that use your API if it's like this, a origin, a destination. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I want it to be origin and destination. And that is the reason why I don't use the prefix a when I write service methods. Again, my own preference. You can use a if you want to carry it over to your API. That's your own choice. And of course, driving directions is supposed to return a route, hopefully. You know, we might not have one, but hopefully we return a route. And then in the implementation, we repeat the whole thing. And now, again, Holger does everything slim in the implementation of the actual service implementation. The driving directions, I created T Directions Manager. That's the class that we're going to look at in the next video. And the direction manager has a method. And there I will use a and get and all these things, because driving directions also doesn't have a get. But that's kind of obvious if I'm in a service. If I say, okay, I'm going to use the direction service and I want the driving directions, I want to say get driving directions in the URL. But again, some people do. I, in this case, don't. So the L manager get driving directions origin and destination passes it on to the manager, and the manager is created and freed. And the result, the T root, is being returned from the L manager get driving directions. That's it. That's the nice and slim declaration of the service. The most difficult part of this tutorial series will be coming up in the next part. In case you watch this all in one go after the series has already been released, please take a break now, get a cup of coffee, have some snacks. Don't just jump into the next video.